Welcome to the fifth BANFU webinar and study day. We've had plenty of webinars in the past, and this is another interesting webinar with very inspiring speakers. We have 4 speakers this afternoon. So I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who is Amelie. Amelie is a mum of 3. And she lives in London. She had her twins in UCLH, and they were born at 24 weeks in December 2019. So just as the COVID pandemic was starting, they spent 3 months at UCLH, which was a level 3 unit in North London, and then 1 month at their local hospital before finally going home in April 2020. So we're going to hear about Amelie's experiences of follow-up, and Angela is going to be interviewing Amelie. Thank you, Amelie.
Hi, Angela.
Hi. Hello, how are you?
I'm good.
Okay, so thank you for taking this interview, Amelie. And we're here. I'm on behalf of Pip Shizon, which is the person that is from us, the lead in the work stream that is for education, because she couldn't be here. Because ideally, we both know each other, but it ideally would be someone different. So if we could talk generically rather than this happened in this specific place or not, or what was your impression, would be better for on behalf of all the parents that are listening to us. So to begin with, I'm a consultant neonatologist. I'm the president for BANFU and the lead for the work stream that is called the clinical service provision. And so I'd be delighted to hear what your experience was. So could you tell us, it's about 4 questions, and let's see if we do this in about 15 minutes. So if you can tell us a little bit about yourself and your child or your children, please.
Yes, so I have a 5-year-old daughter who was also born at UCLH, and normal pregnancy, no problem whatsoever, and she was born at the right time. And then when I was 41, I got pregnant again, which was a surprise, and the big surprise was that it was twins. And the pregnancy was going very well. It was fine, but then one day I wanted to travel. I was 5 months pregnant and I wanted to travel, but I felt a little bit of pain, and I was bleeding a little bit. So I went for a checkup at my hospital. I went to see a midwife, and because my pregnancy was considered as risky pregnancy, because I was 40 and I was pregnant with twins, I got seen very quickly, and then the consultant there decided that it would be better to have a scan to see if everything was fine. And then they realized that my cervix was open, and it was very already. I was in the first stage of basically labor, and at the time I was 23 weeks pregnant. So it was a bit of a shock, and she was very good, basically, and she told me that I should stay in hospital, obviously, and then if I was, they had no clue when the babies would be born. I could be staying a month, or I could be staying a few hours, basically, and this is how it all started, basically, for this birth. And the babies, I managed to stay in the hospital. I stayed in the hospital for 6 days, and then the babies were delivered at 23 weeks and 6 days.
Okay. Thank you. Now, because this is BANFU and this is follow-up, I'd like you to think back of your time when you were in the unit. And if you could remember conversations with the professionals about how being born early might impact on later development, or what would the expectation with regards to development that you had when you were in the unit? How was that experience for you? And is there anything we could have done to improve it?
Mm-hmm. So before being in the unit, when I was going to have the babies, because they were born, they were going to be born below the 24 weeks limit kind of thing. It was our decision to whether the babies should be intubated or not. It was our decision, not an obligation for the doctor, which was the first step, I think, for me as a mother of very premature babies. That's when I asked for this first information and risk of having babies that are so premature. And what I wanted to know at the time is a sort of statistics. I wanted to, because I had no idea at this stage. Obviously, it was so early, and it's very unclear whether these babies would be viable and what kind of consequences there would be if we decided to keep those babies. So my first thing is sort of reassurance in a way. I wanted to know about statistics for this stage, for the 24 weeks. And I was giving statistics that were very sort of not very encouraging, whether for survival rates, but also if the babies were going to survive, what were the risks of developing different sort of disabilities, physical or mental disabilities. So that was the first step, I would say, in the sort of information that I received to make for my journey, basically. So we decided to keep the babies despite the statistics that were not really positive, and the babies were born, and they went straight into the unit. So when I was in the unit, I sort of knew, I was prepared, I would say, in a way, if you can be prepared. I was prepared to lose them. I was prepared to lose them. So I was saying, after we left the unit, the follow-up after we left the unit, yeah, that's really the focus, not within the unit. I can't hear you. I can't hear you, Angela.
It could be either or. So one is whether you were informed about the developmental progress that they were going to have while you were in the unit. Were you aware of this? And then the second question is, has it actually happened, and how was it?
In the unit, so we stayed three months. They stayed 3 months in the unit. So the first week for me, what I was told is if they survive the first sort of 2 weeks, they're more likely to survive. So the first 2 weeks is kind of more like it's blurry, really. It's surreal. It was surreal. And I was being told that basically I had to take it 1 hour at a time, basically, which is a bit, it's quite a shock. It's something that you just need to, this is completely opposite to what your daily life is, basically, where you plan everything. But here you need to stop and just take it, 1 minute at a time. So I was very, what I appreciated, looking back, what I appreciated is that I was not being told, I was being told the whole spectrum of possibilities. And if I was looking at the statistics, obviously it was very negative. But I was also being told that we never know, and babies evolve very rapidly. Their brains are, there's lots of things we don't know still about their development, and we just need to assess and see, So the first 2 weeks, I was very encouraged, I would say, to just, come, of course, come as much as I can and, talk to them and touch them. It was too early to do skin to skin or to hold them. I was being told to just, anything could be possible. The worst and good things could come out. And then after the 2 weeks, I sort of felt that I was sort of reassured that, potentially they had more chances of survival. And now we had to look at all the potential problems that they could have, especially lung-wise and with their lungs and mainly with their lungs, really. My boy had he had something on the brain. When they scanned his brain, he had a sort of like a mark that no one could explain. No one knew what it was. So and no one wanted to explain what it was, because the brain is so growing so much and developing so much that anything could potentially happen. And it was on a bleed, but we didn't know what it was. So basically, I think the time in the unit they sort of taught me to accept and sort of deal with the uncertainty, which I think is what's important to teach parents or to handle with parents, because it's this uncertainty. Because I think when you have a baby that is born so premature, obviously, that potentially there's lots of problems that you can see already or that you can't see already, and they will come later. And you would like answers, but I think the doctors that I spoke to were basically giving me information about what could happen potentially, but we're always making sure that I know that they're not sure 100% and things can evolve.
Yeah.
And I think the way they manage the uncertainty and the way they taught me how to handle or try to handle that uncertainty is the positive thing I left with, because I think this uncertainty stayed with me for 2 years, really. Even though I could see afterwards when we left the unit, of course, there's been ups and downs, and then they came home in April 2020, middle of the pandemic. So in a way, it was a positive thing because they stayed at home with us for 5 months in 2020. But still, for me, until I was being told as well that for the first 2 years, 3 years, they're going to be checked regularly, their progress and health issues and everything. And we can sort of have a clearer vision when they turn 2. This is when we can have maybe a clear vision. If nothing obvious is seen before, we can see a clear vision of their development, especially neurological. So it was basically learning as well to live for 2 years in this sort of uncertainty, because I didn't want to, even though they were doing fine and they were reaching their milestones sort of on time and everything, I was always very sort of cautious, because I've learned that in my time in the unit, I think, to not sort of draw a conclusion on their development.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So now that you've touched on the development that happened after discharge, can you tell us a little bit about what you think about the assessments that were done to your little one?
I think the first sort of official sort of assessment when they were younger than 2, I can't remember how old they were, but it was during the pandemic, and I think we've done it on virtually. And that was a bit more difficult, obviously, than the real assessment face-to-face, because and I think also one of the baby was sleeping at the time or something like that. So Again, I think we were in the end of the pandemic or in the middle of the pandemic. I was at home. It was very for me unsettling to have this assessment during the pandemic at home with the babies. That at the time, one of them was a little bit behind, like not sitting properly. Not sitting where he should be really sitting. So I was very worried about that. But this is due to the pandemic, really. When we had I think it was a 2-year assessment. I don't think there was a sort of more formal. I found the assessment very thorough, extremely thorough, physically. And also neurological wise, the type of exercise that we had to do was very, very advanced. And I remember if we were doing, we would only stop the assessment if we couldn't do something for several times. So because we were managing every sort of test, we kept going and going and going, which was just wow, amazing to see. So the assessment for me was really, in a way, a target or sort of, milestone to reach and to give me a sort of reassurance in a way, or sort of, give me a clearer version of if there's something wrong with them or not, what is wrong. So I think this was really it's a shame that the first one couldn't really happen face to face, because we didn't really have the same discussion. But again, this little boy who was maybe 3 months delayed in sitting, after 3 months he sat down, he did everything later. And then when you have twins, of course, you compare. So he did everything much later than his sister, sitting, holding his head and everything, which were really things I was looking at. But then he did. So I think, this advice of sort of taking it one day at a time was really, really helpful for me, because there's a lot of focus on the children, but I think it's also important to focus on the parents, because it's a very hard situation to be in. And I think you need a lot of support from the team that is doing the follow-up, not only focusing on the children, but also focusing on the parents, because the parents have to handle the very, very, very difficult moments of uncertainty and appointments, a series of appointments here and there, and problems, health problems. So it was also, very positive for me in that way.
Okay, thank you so much, Amelie. So I think we've got just one more minute for any other thoughts that you think that the professional team can help or support you as a family during the early years of development.
I have had a very positive experience. Any concern that I could raise potentially, I was really being asked to sort of give any sort of worry or concern I had, and any concern I potentially had or I wasn't sure, I was referred to the right specialist just to double check. So I've had the best follow-up I could think of, because there was no limit. There was no limit to the sort of to any appointments that I could have if I thought that there was a delay somewhere. So we had appointments with speech therapists and physio. My son had several brain MRI to see if that mark that he had on his brain was reducing or not. Any concern eyesight, they have had a very, very good follow-up. Any concern was being acted upon and referred to a specialist. So and I was also looked after in a way mentally, where every doctor I saw was also asking about how I was handling the situation. So I think the follow-up was really good.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your experience with us, Amelie. It's lovely to see you again. And I'm going to hand over to Anusha now for the next speaker. It's been lovely to see you. Thank you so much. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angela and Amelie. And, you know, it must have been really difficult navigating the healthcare services during that very difficult time during the pandemic. So thank you very much for sharing your experiences. I'm now going to move on to our next speaker, who is Josephine Agyeman-Duah, staying on the theme of making it better for the family, but hearing about her work that she's carried out. So Josephine is an international health professional with extensive work experience in Africa and Europe and in the areas of maternal and child health. She's done a lot of work in quality improvement methodology and health system strengthening. She's worked with international organizations such as the WHO and the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria. And she's also been a special advisor to the Family Larsen Rosenquist Foundation in Switzerland. She has collaborated with governments and worked on many projects promoting child and maternal health. And she's now working with Fran, who's on our webinar as well, and currently pursuing a PhD in women and reproductive health at Oxford University, where her research mainly focuses on neurodevelopmental follow-up of children born preterm. And she works under the tutelage of Professor Stephen Kenny as well. So thank you very much, Josephine. Look forward to hearing about your work.
Thank you very much, Anusha, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. So today I'm presenting to you about parental views on neurodevelopmental follow-up of children born preterm. As a background, this study was conducted at the Oxford University Hospital, where we followed up children born preterm within the EveryPerm study. So at the OUH, all children born less than 32 weeks are offered neurodevelopmental follow-up at age 2. And by neurodevelopment, I'm referring to assessment with cognitive, gross and fine motor, language, and behavior. And this study was conducted between March 2020 and March 2022. All children born preterm at the OUH, except those with life-threatening conditions, were eligible to participate in the study. And for the parent survey and interviews, which I'm going to present to you now, all parents of children in the study were eligible to also participate in the survey and in the interview. I must say that parents who participated in the study are not all parents who receive follow-up at the OUH. So once their child was born at the OUH, they're eligible to participate in the study, but doesn't necessarily mean that their children also receive follow-up at the OUH. In terms of study objectives, in this study, we wanted to evaluate satisfaction among parents with the current standard of care and their opinions on neurodevelopmental follow-up of children born preterm. Also, we wanted to understand parents' experiences, their satisfaction, and recommendations for neurodevelopmental follow-up of children born preterm, and to understand parents' knowledge about neurodevelopmental outcomes among children born preterm.
Sorry, Josephine, I think your slides are not moving. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Please bear with me.
Are you using the mouse, Josephine, or I think
I'm
there's...
using a mouse. It's moving on my side, but let me...
I think when you uploaded it to the share screen, sometimes using the computer arrow works a little bit better rather than the mouse. And sometimes it's down or sometimes it's right.
Okay. Okay, I'll try one more time and hope this works. Please, can you see the slides move now?
Yeah, it's moving.
Yeah, that's it now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well done.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. So we employ two methods: parent survey, which we hosted on Qualtrics and sent parents the link to complete the survey, and then parent in-depth interviews. We did this through convenience and purposive sampling, and at the end, we conducted thematic content analysis of the interviews. When we reached midway, when we had conducted 17 interviews, we did a preliminary analysis to find out whether we were achieving different themes or if we had reached saturation. And so we continued the interviews until saturation was achieved at 29 interviews. And we received ethics approval for the study. So I'd like to share with you now some of the findings from the parent survey. In all, we recruited 115 parents from 110 unique families, and then this is made up of 112 children who received assessment in our study. And some of the families who participated in, some of them we had both parents attending the session. We received 78 survey responses, and after data cleaning, we used only 65 of the responses in the analysis. So in the subsequent slides, unless otherwise stated, we've used 65 responses for the analysis. So this is to show that we had a fair representation of the preterm subgroups in parents with the different preterm subgroups taking part in the survey. So we have the very preterm represented by the blue color, the moderate in yellow, and then the late preterm in green. So this is just a snapshot of some of the questions we asked parents. Again, the blue color represents the parents of very preterm children, yellow is for the moderate, and green for the late preterm. The deeper colors are yes responses, and the lighter colors are no responses. So we asked parents whether they are aware if their child could develop some neurodevelopmental problems or experience delays as a result of being born preterm. And across subgroups, more parents express that yes, they are aware of that. And then we asked parents again if they had any concerns about their child's neurodevelopment. So here again, in the lighter colors, the parents expressed that, well, some expressed they had some concerns, whilst others did not. So for the late preterm, moderate preterm, more parents expressed concerns. And then we asked parents if they were informed about the possible need for a neurodevelopmental assessment in the future. And as expected, or as we anticipated, parents of the moderate and late preterm here, as you can see, said no, because their children do not receive the routine follow-up at age 2. Whereas more parents of children born very preterm said yes, they were informed that their children could receive assessment in the future. So we're also interested in knowing from parents whether they think they receive enough information about neurodevelopmental outcomes. And again, parents of the moderate and late preterm expressed no, more no's than the very preterm. So we also asked parents if they received any form of neurodevelopmental assessment, and we had more parents of the very preterm saying yes, and more of moderate to late preterm saying no. So this is just a snapshot overview of parent experiences based on how early or how soon their child was born. The slide shows the information preferences for information sharing. So we asked parents if and what type of information they would like to receive. So across preterm subgroups, parents expressed that they would like to receive information about follow-up, outcomes, and caring for child born preterm. This slide is about satisfaction. So we wanted to know how satisfied parents are with the current follow-up children born preterm receive. The green color represents satisfaction, purple is dissatisfaction, and then the yellow is indifference. So on the x-axis, you see the preterm subgroups, and then the y-axis shows the percentage of satisfaction. So here we see more parents, about 87% of parents of children born very preterm being satisfied with the current follow-up, whereas about 67% of parents of children born late preterm are not satisfied with the current follow-up, possibly because their children do not qualify for the routine follow-up at age 2. Now I'm going to share with you some responses from the parent interviews. So at the end of the interviews, as I mentioned, we had 29 interviews done, also across different parent preterm subgroups. And we wanted fair representation, so we also selected parents with children who were born as singletons, twins, and triplets. There were mothers, there were father-mother sessions, and then father only. And then these parents were parents whose children received vision-only assessment or the full neurodevelopmental assessment. Through the thematic content analysis, we came up with 3 main themes, which is dimension 1, parent factors, dimension 2, NHS factors, and dimension 3, child factors. So in the next slides, I'll share with you some of the themes from each of the dimensions. So under parent factors, parents expressed the need for continued support and contact after their children were discharged. There were concerns also about parental mental health and support that they would like to receive from the health system. And we also had a theme about fathers' voice, fathers voicing out that they would like to be involved in research. So these are some of the quotes from parent interviews. It's just representative. These are not all the quotes. We've just selected some of the quotes. So under the first dimension, which is parental factors, the theme on parental concerns, I'll pause for a few seconds and I'll allow you to read a quote from a parent whose child was born very preterm, and then from a twin. They were twins. Okay, so I move on to the next one, which is the quote or under the theme of parental mental health, where parents express the anxieties they go through and advocating for mental health support, especially in the first year of life. So I'll pause and give you sometimes quite a busy slide, so I'll give you a few seconds to read through. Okay, so these are some quotes from parents about mental health and the support they would like. So in the father's voice, we had a parent expressing the need to involve fathers in research and fathers trying to support their partners. Again, I'll give you some few seconds to read through. Okay, so parents also felt reassured when they got the chance to speak with an experienced health worker. So this is a parent expressing that she felt reassured. So again, I'll give you a moment to please read. So this goes to kind of conform with what we found out in the parent survey, the parent wanting information and feeling reassured through that. So now we move on to dimension 2, the NHS factors. Some of the themes for under dimension 2 include health visitors, which was a theme that we didn't set out to find, but it came out quite strongly across all parent interviews. And most of these comments were parents expressing that they felt health visitors did not have enough capacity to support them as parents of children born preterm, and then also advocating for parents to be empowered to support or to be part of the neurodevelopmental follow-up journey. We also had themes around the impact of COVID-19 on follow-up and then on parents and children as well. So in the next slides, I'll share with you some of the quotes under dimension 2. So for the health visitors, some parents felt that they don't have specialized skills to support them. So I'll give you a moment to just read and okay, so just for you to see what parent preferences and expectations are. In the next slide, I'll read this. This is a comment from a parent who also happened to be a health visitor. And this is what the parent said. I am a health visitor, but I know that a lot of my colleagues probably have never worked with preterm babies. So I do wonder if that's something that maybe we could look into. I know the Institute of Health Visiting have just done training for health visitors on how to look after parents emotionally when they are on the neonatal unit. But I don't think they've looked at the neurological side of maybe the follow-ups. We do a lot of follow-ups, and we know a lot about the brain development in children and a lot about infant mental health. But I do wonder if there was more national guidance on maybe using the same assessment tools between hospitals and in the community might work better as well. So this is a parent whose child was born singleton and very preterm, and also happens to be a health worker, sharing with us her own experience as a health worker. And then although most of the comments about health workers were not quite positive, we did have some positive feedback about a parent appreciating the support they received from the health worker and said that they feel quite supported and felt that the child was pretty well checked out. So still under Dimension 2, under the NHS factors, these are some of the codes under the impact of COVID-19 on neurodevelopmental follow-up, where parents expressed that they were slightly disappointed because they could not have the in-person assessment, and they would have wished that they had that for their own reassurance. So I'll give you a brief moment to read through some of the codes. Okay, so the last point under the NHS factors is a parent also expressing that whilst in the hospital after delivery, they receive excellent service, but once parents are discharged, then the service is not as of an excellent nature as they receive in the hospital. So the parent expressed that it's just hard when all of that slips away and you have incredible support in the hospital, but it's different when you have been discharged. So finally, on the theme under the Dimension 3, parents also talked about advocated for early interventions for children in need. So this is a parent who feels that the NHS is stretched and therefore resources should be prioritized to offer early interventions to children who are in need. So in summary, I'd like to share with you the lessons learned. Through this parent survey and interviews, we have learned that parents of children born moderate to late preterm were less satisfied than parents of very preterm with the current follow-up. And parents want continuous support once their babies are discharged from the hospital in the form of a contact with the hospital for their reassurance and then information at discharge. In information, they would like information about neurodevelopmental follow-up, neurodevelopmental outcomes, and caring for a child born preterm. And also parents would like mental health support for themselves. And although some parents have understanding of neurodevelopmental outcomes that a child born preterm could experience, others do not know what to expect. We've also learned that parents were not satisfied with the input they received from the health visitors, and they had expectations that the health visitors would provide tailored support to their children born preterm. Also, we've learned that involving fathers in pediatric qualitative studies provides perspectives unique to their parenting role and enriches the parental discourse in research studies. And then finally, parents' feedback and satisfaction with neurodevelopmental follow-up provide great insights that can improve the follow-up of children born preterm. So I'd like to appreciate my supervisors, Professor Stephen Kennedy and Dr. Francis O'Brien, who is here with us, the Integral 21st team, and all parents and families who participated in the study. Thank you.
Thank you, Josephine. It's a very insightful study and very nicely highlighted exactly all the kind of concerns and parental views that we've been trying to improve. And hopefully now that the government is starting to listen to especially mental health in families and parents, that there are some initiatives that are being started, and And obviously having that designated name person for families is really, really important. But, as we know, we're all working in a healthcare system where there are a lot of cutbacks. So we just have to kind of try and modify our practice and try and make it better for all the families' experiences through follow-up. Thank you very much. I'm now going to move on to the next speaker, who is Angela's going to be interviewing another mother, Caroline. Caroline had she had a preterm baby who was born. Her little daughter was born by an emergency cesarean section at 28 weeks. And after a short but difficult pregnancy, and Caroline went through quite a traumatic kind of delivery and experienced a long course in the neonatal unit. So I'm going to hand over to both Caroline and Angela. Thank you.
Thank you, Anusha. I was just noticing the time. So we are now 13:45. So thank you so much, Caroline, for agreeing to talk to us. It's lovely to have you with us in Banfu, and I really appreciate that you wanted to share your experience with this group. So I'm Angela Huertas, and I'm a consultant neonatologist here in London. And thank you again for doing this. I'm the president today of Banfu, but from today is going to be Fran O'Brien. So my last day today. But anyway, so I'm very privileged to be here interviewing you. So similar to what we've just done with Amelie, I'd like to ask you a few questions. Of course, you can expand as you wish. And I just kind of modulate a bit so that we don't go over time. But thank you again. So if you wouldn't mind to tell us a little bit about yourself and your child, please.
So I'm a mum to five children. I already had 4 boys at home before I had my daughter. I did lose another girl. My second child was stillborn, unfortunately. So we were very anxious during my daughter's pregnancy because we'd already lost our other female child. So we were quite anxious, and I started bleeding at 40 weeks, and then my waters broke. That's what carried on, and then at 23 weeks my waters broke, and then they said I'd probably deliver within the next 3 days, and when that didn't happen, they said, oh, you'll probably deliver within the next week, and then that didn't happen, and my husband put me on bed rest and said, you're not going to move. And then at 28 weeks there was just lots of bleeding, and they didn't know what was causing that, and so they we all made the decision that we need to deliver now, because they'd given me the same statistics as Amelie, so that obviously when my waters broke at 23 weeks, the hospital that I was actually under were horrific, and they called the baby a parasite and said there's no chance of survival, and then I was transferred to the hospital that I delivered in, who had the specialist neonatal unit, and so I was given statistics on survival, and obviously at 23 weeks survival chances are very slim, and same at 24 weeks really, but obviously by 28 weeks the chance of survival is much higher, and I did know at that point, obviously there's a big chance of obviously particularly earlier on there was a big chance of having developmental problems, and so I was fully aware of that, and me and my husband were both agreed that we didn't care what problems the baby would have, we would still want them to be alive, we'd still want them to be with us, and we would do everything that we could to to help them survive. So that was our sort of stance really.
Okay, thank you. Now thinking back at your time in the unit, can you remember conversations with the professionals about how being born early would impact on her development, and how was that experience for you? I mean, is there anything that they could have done that was better?
I think I did have conversations with neonatologists while I was on the maternity ward before I delivered, and I think they were very thorough. They went through, some of them were, I spoke to a few of them because obviously it was 5 weeks, and some of them were incredible. They gave me all the information about every single thing that could go wrong. I had all the information about NEC and all the eye problems, and they were really good, and I'm the sort of person that likes to have lots of information, so that was really helpful for me, and they gave me leaflets and things that I could read, and that was really good. And when I actually found my way onto the unit, I don't feel like there was as much information given
in
to
the
me.
unit. You see,
at that point, when things happened, so when she had suspected NEC, obviously I had details of that, but actually in terms of development, I don't really feel like there was much information information given to me at that point. I suppose I'd already had a lot of information.
Yeah, probably.
But I did I spent almost all of my time cuddling my daughter. I had her, in skin to skin all the time. We couldn't stay over at the hospital for the entire 9 weeks, but I was there every day for as long as I possibly could be. I had really good support at home looking after my other children, so I was there all the time. And I remember really clearly a conversation with the man who did my daughter's brain scans while she was in hospital, and he said, don't worry about her development. He said, as long as you don't put her in front of the TV, she'll be absolutely fine. And I really held on to that, but actually that was a really unrealistic expectation, and I really took that as, he thinks everything's positive. And my daughter's nearly 5 now, and she does have a lot of problems. She's got global developmental delay, and actually to give me that false expectation, I think was a little bit cruel, because I can still see his face, I can see my daughter, I can still sort of feel her, how I was holding her when he spoke to me, and it's heartbreaking really that actually that didn't happen, and our experience was very different.
So that you think it could have been better by giving you kind of a balanced view more than
I'd obviously heard of cerebral palsy and all the problems that all the sort of disabilities that children can have, so I was fully aware of those, but there was no signs of anything in my daughter. In the neonatal unit everything looked okay.
Okay, I see. So maybe more information. Okay, fine.
There wasn't any information about delays, so I don't know where I got this information from, but my expectation was that she was born 3 months early. She might be delayed by 3 months, but that was what happened.
Okay.
After those 3 months, she was still, newborn baby, and even after 6 months, she's still, newborn baby. Can't hold her head, can't sit up. Whereas, at 6 months old, my other children, even 6 months corrected, she still wasn't sitting up. She still couldn't hold her head. And my other children, had been in the same chair. I had the same high chair for all my boys. It had done 4 children, and that was the high chair she was going to go in, and she couldn't cope with that. I mean, she couldn't sit up at all. She had to have like a specialist one. So that was
okay. So that was in the unit. So let's see, exactly, talking about when she was growing up. So let's say after she was discharged, how was your follow-up? Did you have any follow-up? Did you have assessments? Did you have do you remember anything that you had that would be good or bad, or that you would have changed?
Well, she was discharged in the June, and we didn't see anybody from the neonatal unit again until the January. She did have, on discharge from the hospital, she was referred to physiotherapy and occupational therapy, which the physiotherapy was brilliant. We saw them from the September, and it was every 2 weeks we were seeing them, and they gave us little activities to help her to encourage her to roll and things, which she didn't do for a very long time, but they eventually gave us specialist equipment to help her sit up and things, and the physio were amazing. We really can't fault them at all, until they discharged her, which is another story. I don't feel like they kind of, once she could walk, that was it, which she still needs help, so that was a bit frustrating. But in the early period, they were amazing. But she was also referred for occupational therapy, but I delivered in a hospital that was in a different county. It was not very far from my house, but it's still in a different county, and the occupational therapy department rejected the referral because we were out of area, because we were in a different county. And I spoke to my health visitor, who, like the lady previous said, she had no experience of neonatal. She wasn't very knowledgeable at all. So she just said, just wait till there's a problem. But I tried to refer myself, and eventually I did get to see someone, but we'd already bought her a specialist high chair because she was a year old and still couldn't sit, and they did help us with a bath seat, but it was just frustrating that because of our postcode we couldn't have had that referral. But when she did eventually see the neonatologist in the January, he didn't do any assessments with her. He just sort of took on board everything we'd said, and at that point I was trying to be very positive with everything. So rather than thinking about everything she can't do. I was just trying to celebrate those, little things that she could do. She's following things with her eyes, or, so I was just very positive in that appointment. And he was a little bit negative and saying, well, she should be doing this and should be doing this. But then when we got the letter through, he said, development was fine. And I looked at that and I thought, well, actually, I don't think her development is fine. And I looked at, what should a baby be doing at this stage? And obviously it was a lot more than she was doing. So I contacted my health visitor and I phoned his secretary, but it was a long time before I got an appointment with him again. The health visitor did the 9-month check, and obviously she was in the black areas for everything. She's got global developmental delay. She was, wasn't hitting any of those milestones at all. So then when we saw the neonatologist again, he arranged for her to have, an MRI scan and things, but we still didn't have, there wasn't an assessment with him. He didn't go through, tick boxes or anything like that. Eventually, the health visitor managed to get us referred to Portage, so they did the Portage assessment. But
so that took a while. Okay. So that's really good that you're sharing this with us. I'm just seeing that Anusha has appeared in my screen, but we started 10 minutes later than we were meant to, so we still have a bit to go. So anyway, in this context of questions that you went with Pip, she mentioned that you may want to talk about each family is unique and may have different preferred ways of communicating. Which ways would you prefer to have communication be given to you about your child? How could you be supported better? How can we help? How can we have done a better job for you?
Just sort of knowing what was, what was going to happen. So I didn't know what to expect when we, left the unit, and just sort of knowing, what to do, and, if they're not hitting the milestones, what do you do? Because I didn't know what to do. And, I kept trying to refer her to speech and language because she wasn't cooing and she wasn't babbling. And it just took a very, very long time to actually, get an appointment with them. And then because she was too young, they wouldn't see her. And it was just such a struggle to actually get any of these services in place for her. So I think, I think things have changed. Obviously, this was nearly 5 years ago. So it does sound like things have changed an awful lot since then, and the way that you do things now sounds incredible. I think when I was talking to Pip, she said it was the 3-month assessment where they'd got to go through, and there was nothing like that. So to know that we're on track or we're not, and if we're not, what are we doing? That would have been it would have been really comforting to know that it was all being managed rather than it all sort of being on me. And I felt guilty that maybe I hadn't rang up and pestered enough to get these things, and whereas if it was all there, and if this isn't happening by this date, this will happen, just to have a sort of plan, that would have been really helpful.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. We've learned a lot. And yes, still there are many services in the UK that we are not reaching, nowhere there. It's just so difficult. So that's our plan. And I hope in the future, we all have a good service in which we can provide for all of you, for all the parents and the children. And thank you, because you're an experienced mum, so you could compare your other children with your little one, and there you could just fight for her. But how many of those mums is the first baby and they don't know? And so wonderful. So thank you so much, Caroline, for sharing with us. Thank you for being in Banfu, and thank you for coming to the webinar. Thank you. I leave Anusha now. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. I think you really did highlight a very important problem that we have in neonatal neurodevelopmental services, and that's the interboundary kind of services, and how to streamline that really. And we're in the process of trying to map out nationally all the services and trying to make it a bit of a more smoother journey for parents, but it's still in progress at the moment, and hopefully the experiences will be a lot better in the future for all our families throughout the country. Thank you very much, Caroline. Thank you. I'm now going to move on to our next speaker, who's going to talk about the impact of parental engagement. Phill Harniess is a clinical academic physiotherapist with research interests in early intervention, parenthood, and childhood disability. He's a PhD candidate at UCL a clinical team lead at GSTT Community Pediatric Physio Department, and recently taken on a postdoctoral fellow role with the Penn Crew team in the University of Exeter, researching the Healthy Parent Carer program. So lots of hats, Phil. Thank you very much, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Anusha and Angela. I'm going to share my slides. I know that we're up against it in terms of time, so hopefully this won't be too rushed. So I'm just going to draw your attention to those that have been attentive. My title is slightly different to what's on the programme. So yeah, these slides were actually prepared for a thing that I did with EI Smart, and but they come from my PhD work, and yeah, it's a great opportunity also to share that with you today. So really the focus is around this parental engagement experience in early intervention, and particularly at the time of early period, this time of uncertainty that we've heard a lot about already today. And at this stage, I want to thank my supervisors as well for their support on this project. So what we're hoping to achieve is just to think about what do we mean by parental engagement, potentially probe into what our assumptions are of that, what it looks like, and so on and so forth, and really to contrast that to the parental experience and perceptions of what happens in the reality. And what we're focused in here is really this early period, the time when parents obviously have been through the stormy start of the neonatal unit, as we've heard a lot about today. And my interest in this project was really about that first 2 years of life when parents are getting home in the community services, receiving early intervention. And I'm specifically here looking at infants with emerging cerebral palsy. So that's obviously the focus group that we've got here. And at the end, hopefully there'll be some implications for us. Okay, so why engagement, and why is that sort of interest? This has become quite an important area of research in recent years. Obviously, we know that early intervention is really provides the best opportunity for babies with cerebral palsy in terms of long-term outcomes, and getting in earlier is obviously better. And that relies a lot on this relationship with parents. And I think when we're talking about engagement, it is quite a complex thing that we're talking about. And what we really need to understand is that this is co-produced, it's co-constructed between parent and therapist. And that's a very dynamic and interesting thing that's going on in terms of engagement. Sometimes we think about parents engaging in, as I've put there, to exploring parents engage in early intervention. But we could also look at it the other way around, that as professionals, actually what we're doing is engaging in the lives of families. So to really flip the narrative, flip the coin there, I think is a very important thing to think about. I keep moving you all. I'm just going to minimize this. There we go. So the study that I've undertaken has used this approach, this qualitative research approach. I won't go into this in great detail in the interest of time, but as you can see, there's 3 phases. It's involved a number of different types of methods, interviews, one-to-one, focus groups, as well as quite in-depth as well studies of particular cases over time, using videos and looking at what's happening within sessions in the community. And so I had 3 London sites that I used for recruitment, and we were able to get 20 parents from 15 different families. And as you can see, there's a lot of therapists involved as well at different stages. So the focus today is mostly on the first phase of the study. The data is taken from there mostly, but there'll be dribs and drabs from the other phases as well. The parent participants, as you would expect, were representative of quite a broad range of backgrounds, as would be in common with an urban population. And what was really important as well, as we've already heard Josephine talking about, is involving dads in the research. So we really tried very hard to get as many dads as we could involved. And although obviously there were more mums, as you can see, there's 14 mums, 6 dads were also involved, and it's really important to hear their perspectives. And then the ages at which we were able to interview, age of the infant at which we were able to interview the parents was varied as well in the first 2 years of life, and the types of presentations as well that we saw also different. So I just want to start with this question. I suppose it's something that you might, I think I hear a lot from professional colleagues. This is an engaged parent. This is not an engaged parent. This is such and such. And we all have these kind of assumptions and ideas of what this looks like. And I think this quote here is quite a common thing that we hear. And I just want to place it there at this early stage. This was taken from the third phase of the study. And this is a physio talking about what they think an engaged parent is and what that looks like. So this is about parents listening to all you're saying, taking it on board, and maybe being able to demonstrate things that you said to them before and asking questions. And I find it quite interesting when you start to probe and to look at these expectations that we have and where they come from, and all those things are very interesting to me. So we'll just place that there for now, and we'll continue. When we're talking to the parents, as we well know, obviously I was talking to parents as they're first arriving home and in the first 2 years of life, but this pre-existing context of the neonatal unit was long-lasting. And this is just one quote. I could use so many, but from a dad who talked about the fact that this was the emotional impact of that, as we all know, this is what's been talked about again today, is that it's long-lasting, and for this dad is something that you could tap into quite easily because of the emotions of that time, and every time that he's with his child, and this is also within therapy, he's still got that emotional trauma that's with him. And that's quite an important thing to understand, that when we're entering into early intervention and therapy, we're not just talking of physiotherapy and occupational therapy. We're talking here, we're not just talking about physical activities. There's a lot more going on in terms of engagement, which acts at an emotional level, a cognitive level, as well as the things that we're doing behaviorally as well. So the other side of things is trying to make sense of the data. And when we're listening to the parents and what they're talking through, there's a very clear, bigger sort of theme of what was happening in terms of this expected transition to parenthood was completely disrupted. And we've heard a lot again about that. But over and above that, there's obviously then further problems that the child's encountering, early prognostic workup in terms of understanding that this baby has cerebral palsy or is at risk of having cerebral palsy. So through this disrupted transition that parents begin to frame their early engagement experience in early intervention. And this is through uncertainty. We've heard a lot about that. So it's great that we've got validation of that framing that parents have talked about already. And that was Amelie who's talking about that. It's almost that is we need to normalize uncertainty as a framing of what's going on. And then for many parents as well, it moved on from that to other stages. So there's a lot of internal processing going on, dealing with what's gone before, the trauma, but also grieving as things are going on over time as well. And there's almost like a primary trauma and grieving from the unanticipated preterm birth or the traumatic birth in many cases. That's the primary grief. And then there's a secondary grief as well that's going on with the emerging diagnosis and this lifelong disability that is obviously being presented over time to parents. And what was interesting was to understand from parents the prognostic workup and the circumstances that were going on around that and how that influenced the perception of what early intervention was about and their role in early intervention. So this early uncertainty actually was interesting when we're talking about the prognosis using the videos and the MRI. We now can say that this baby is at risk of cerebral palsy, be a bit more specific and hopefully transparent in communication with parents. But for a lot of parents, this was still the created uncertainty. It was like said but not said, parents were talking about. And that was really difficult then for them to rationalize what really early intervention was about. We'll talk about that briefly in a moment as well. Is when the turning point really happened around the firmer diagnosis, when the labeling of cerebral palsy was a bit more secure, that parents moved into a different phase and really started to look at what this early intervention was all about, and really pursuing that in a more intensive way. And then later, which we won't have time to look at today, but some parents moving into a slightly different framing of what it's all about. But as you can see, there's a lot of overlapping in these frames, and actually it's not as linear as it would appear on the page in terms of the experience, and you know, that was a very up and down period for parents working through this. So what was it like for parents engaging through this uncertainty? This is the silent period, this first 6 months of life, when for parents it's like, well, there doesn't seem to be anything wrong at the minute. You can't really see anything that's going on. And for parents, this is quite an overwhelming time with lots of stuff still going on from the unit, lots of medical things to overcome, and still working through these circumstances that still feel out of control, particularly that thrown in the deep end by coming home and then not quite knowing what to expect when you get home. So this parent here on the left, very confused about that when they first came home, that maybe, okay, she looks fine, she's only a baby, how can the doctor even tell? But also this thing that parents needed recovery when they first got home, and this time for them was really important, almost to protect that time, to get over the trauma of what had gone before. And then all of a sudden you have the services being offered and bombarded in some of these cases, and finding that actually disruptive to some of that protected space that they wanted to have to reform or to bond with the family. And also the way that it's framed is in terms of early intervention at this early stage before the firm diagnosis, it's like an if scenario. So if your baby develops cerebral palsy, then having early intervention is going to be the best thing. But that doesn't really help the rationalizing and the thoughts around that, but to really get that strong motivation for what it's about. And then there's the other side of this, which is parents admitting that actually trying to ignore that at-risk label, hoping nothing was wrong, hoping that the baby would overcome, not seeing it, not hearing it, and maybe also admitting a bit of complacency that they possibly didn't get the gravity of it all. And that's obviously combined with all the other stuff that's going on at that stage. But there's a kind of a rock and a hard place that parents are in, and this parent on the side here is saying that it's hard if there's something wrong, you want early intervention, but that's linked to confusion. Why are you here? Why do you need to see me so often right now? So these parent therapist relationships can help make sense in some circumstances, but in others might add confusion. And I think this links as well to psychological domain of uncertainty, how some people respond in uncertainty with approaching the problem, trying to do as much as you can to find out as much as you can about what to do. And this might be this sort of also the relief and the reassurance that parents feel by the presence of therapy at this early stage. But for other parents, they talked about more of a begrudging, like they had to do it. It felt like something they had to do. And it wasn't necessarily something that they wanted to do at that time. And that's almost another response, the psychological response to uncertainty, which is avoiding the situation a little bit. So these are the sort of different responses that people are known to respond to uncertainty in different ways, approaching or avoiding. And that's sort of fitted a little bit with the data there, as you can see in terms of the quotes. In the interest of time, I'll move those on. So it's really trying to understand this context for parents in a deeper way. And what was obvious to me, that parents are in this kind of trust vulnerability context, that if you're a professional coming into the life of a family at this very early time, which has obviously got all these different things going on, all these different aspects that we talked about that build this vulnerability, they have to know that you're worthy of trust, that you are trustworthy, and in order to extend that trust. And this comes from many different places. This is just one quote that sort of emphasizes that, which is about this, the sense that these people are coming into your home, into your life, and watching you. I think most parents, mums especially, feel quite self-conscious when you've just had a child and everyone is telling you what to do, particularly when you've had a sick child. So you feel like you don't have not ownership of your child, but I think I said the last time, I didn't feel like I could bond with him in the hospital because I was so surrounded by people interfering all the time. So it's into this context that therapists are coming into the community, and it's really important to be mindful of that. And it's true to say that parents, before they engage in therapy, they're actually engaging in the relationship, engaging with the therapists themselves before the therapy. So they need to know, as I said, that you're trustworthy, to extend that trust. And that comes about from different aspects: reciprocity, respect, a lot of these sort of aspects of communication, which are so key. Again, probably don't have time to go into them in so much detail. How the therapist presents themselves, their personability, the way that they approach the situation, their gentleness and care, all that type of thing was really important to parents. And so that belief in the therapist leads to belief in the therapy itself, and obviously is a motivating factor itself. The other thing to say is that parents clearly know that they have a big part to play. Many parents talked about this, that in early intervention, they understand it's a partnership, and they want to participate. They accept that responsibility. And in fact, particularly when the diagnosis of cerebral palsy became clear, for them, it was doing something about it through therapy was really motivating, was intrinsically motivating. So that, again, really is quite an important factor for parents. But whilst parents talked about accepting responsibility and how important that was to them to do something and to partner in this relationship, they also talked about the fact that with that and the fact that there's
I've tagged my email.
Oh, we've got some chatter.
Excuse me, can we have microphones muted?
Thank you. So I wasn't sure if that was a question, so I'll continue. So while the accepting responsibility, on the other side of that responsibility is accountability pressure, and that is you can't have one without the other. And certainly parents were talking about this from their point of view, and this comes again in many different forms. There is this feeling of guilt, and we hear this obviously a lot, making better what I didn't do right, which is an incredibly sad thing to hear, but it is the reality, I think, for many parents. Parents asking themselves, are we doing enough, and not quite knowing when enough is enough in terms of the dose or the intensity of therapy, and that's quite a big pressure. There's a protective instinct of wanting to protect the child that's been through a lot, as well as the wider needs of the family. There's on the bottom left there is this reality check that you're relying on me, the therapist is relying on me to do it, and if I don't do it, potentially she's not going to get better. And that's then got the tension with this low self-confidence and the fear of doing some of the activities that are being asked of them. Neuroplasticity was a really interesting thing, and how parents engage with this discourse. It's clear that around firm diagnosis of cerebral palsy, that is a big thing that is discussed. And for parents, this provides a lot of hope and motivation, and that really is the trigger for this pursuit frame. But at the same time, there's a bit of pressure with that, and parents talked about this, and I'll explain a little bit more, in the sense that time is running out. This first 2 years of life are so important, and you need to do everything you can, and there's a lot of sort of discussion, almost like you're trying to fix this problem before you lose this time. And then this idea that also, when you're watching, when is it going to start working, adds to the pressure. And then finally, we heard a little bit about this as well, how milestones are quite scary. Every time a child achieves a milestone, there's another one to think about. And then there's this oppressing obsession with milestones from the point of view of society in terms of child development, but also in terms of the going to see professionals and so on. So this Sandtimer effect was really interesting, and this is something which I try to sort of think about and conceptualize, that the fact that parents accept active responsibility and invest in early intervention, feel this accountability, but then this requires a real intensive pursuit, a real intensive investment at this early stage. And this, for many parents, becomes interconnected with how they start to see themselves as parents, how their own well-being as well potentially could be affected as well. So These are just some of the quotes that support this. If we look at the first one here, the way I describe it is like one of those sand timers. You feel time's essentially running out, and every day that passes, if you're not trying to do something about it, you've lost a day. And then Warren here as well. We've had some expectations about what becoming parents would be, but now we know we can no longer sort of let that happen organically. It feels like every moment, every day is lost unless you're not doing something. So that's the kind of understanding from this pursuit framing of the engagement. So if we return then to this idea of what does an engaged parent look like, we can see that it is clearly a lot more complex and a lot more going on from the parent side than maybe what we appreciate as professionals. And some of our assumptions as well potentially need to be challenged and thought through at the different times. We have all these different things going on, the pre-existing context that is added of the neonatal unit and that trauma adding to all these things, and then the fact that you have this emerging disability compounds many of these factors on the page here. And then you ask yourselves, how can we really support parents in the best way in light of this? So we need to ask ourselves what are appropriate and what are reasonable expectations for parental engagement. In terms of time, I think I'll just keep things moving. And this, I think, was a quote that really, for me, encapsulated what I believe is really important for us to take away almost as a message, and to understand every parent and family as an individual family. And this understands that. So parents come to us in a very vulnerable position. I don't think that it's correct that we as health professionals have expectations of parents. I think we need to be a safe place where we can hold what is actually quite a fragile family unit and respect that this is still a relationship in formation, both for the parent and their child, but also parents with professionals having a difficult start to life or difficult introduction to your parenting journey degrades what you would expect the parental role to be. And we all have those images of what we expect to be like as parents. So this is about almost like understanding the grief of normal parenthood that many of our parents are going through, and meeting them where they're at. So again, don't have time really to get into the depths of this, but what I saw in reality, especially when using video, was that there's so many unspoken expectations of roles, and how parents looked at their own role and the role of the therapist, and therapists looked at their own role and the role of the parent, and how those became negotiated but without words. So it's the idea that actually there's not often a meta conversation about what role we're going to take on, how we're going to work out this relationship, how we're going to work knowledge together on this situation in a more cooperative and equal way. And I think most often in a professional and the socio-cultural aspect of that, things emerge and they are influenced by the context of where they're happening, and we're not necessarily having the bigger conversations to say we can actually do things differently. So this is just working really with some of the things that I've seen. We saw through the video how actually most of the negotiation of the expertise and engagement and what was going on in the session was not talked about. It was acted out through the different props and so on the stage, if you like, of the therapy room or in the home. And if we think about the baby's behavior as their language, we can think about the same way that our behavior as parents, as professionals, is our language as well, in terms of how we engage and how we are going about these relationships. So again, don't have time necessarily to go into the ins and outs of this slide, but this is really just to say that the literature really is supporting the fact that active involvement of parents is such an important part of parents starting to understand and develop confidence in their own parenting role, and their sort of self-efficacy as well of what they're trying to achieve through parenting a child with an additional need. And that starts extremely early. And if we think about the experience of that, parents becoming more capable and seeing the effect of their intervention, they're more likely to seek out participatory experiences, which will reinforce this positive cycle as well. But we really need to think about how we involve and work with parents in an equal way in that case. One parent in EI Smart talked about the neonatal unit being like training in an advocacy role. And so I think of the neonatal unit, not just about early intervention for the baby, but it's early intervention for relationships for parents with professionals and vice versa. These are the foundations that set up the path, really. And we need to really help parents in terms of priming their confidence and their advocacy for their child in that very early stage. And this is done through many different ways that parents talked about in the study as well. And I think it is a lot to do with this collaborative participation and what that looks like. Just finally, again, another factor in terms of observing what was going on within sessions, shared observations were a really powerful way that therapists and parents engaged around the infant in terms of understanding what was going on and learning. But there was questions at times of who decides the focus of what to observe, how are these observations shared, whose voice is privileged, whose expertise is privileged. Is it a dialogue, or is it the therapist who's directing much of this conversation? How are we drawing out the knowledge of parents of their situation and their child through shared observations? And I don't have, again, space to talk about that in any depth, but it's really interesting to start to explore that alongside education theory and other things in terms of other theory that's out there as well in this space. So just as final reflections, I think that we are in a stage now where obviously engagement is active engagement is such an important part of the relationship between practitioners and patients more generally, and in terms of our setting here, our field, that's obviously the same. We need to ask ourselves what are appropriate expectations during this time of chaos, of trauma and uncertainty, and how this might be an emergent and a changing picture for parents in terms of how they engage, and really start to understand that in a deeper way. Also, I haven't really got into this, but what about parents who maybe engage in different ways to what we expect, that maybe have a different cultural health capital to what might enable some parents to engage in ways we expect? Is our communication model truly power sharing, or are we constraining aspects of collaboration? So we need to start by listening and considering how parents are framing engagement, how they want to engage with in early intervention, in the relationship, and then this individualizing of the communication, which is so closely tied up with our education approach. So we might need, as practitioners, much more resourcefulness and thought around that. So I hope that wasn't too quick, but I'll stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Phil. Thank you. I think you encapsulated most parents' sort of like thoughts and feelings by saying it's the like said but not said, which really captures how they feel. We've got lots of parents on the webinar, so it's our time. I know we're running out of time, but we did start late. So if you can either put up your hand, and we've already got one hand up, or put your question on the chat, we will try and address some of these questions. Thank you, Phil.
Can we see Ruth Butterworth? Would you like to unmic yourself? I think you've got a question.
Apologies, that's a tech fail. I'm not meant to have my hand up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. In that case, just while I'm waiting for any other audience members to put their hands up, I wonder if I could just ask Angela or Anusha. When you were talking earlier, you mentioned looking at services across the country and maybe mapping those services and seeing where we go next. Are you allowed to give us a sneaky peek about where that's going?
Angela, do you want to answer that, or do you want me to?
I'm happy to answer. So the BANFU has 4 work streams. One of those is called clinical service provision. And from the clinical service provision, there's a group that is working together with Newcastle University in mapping the services. Mapping involves 2 things. One, that is contact details for the people that are around the UK, either physios, speech and language therapists, dietitians, occupational therapists, psychologists, doctors, doing follow-up. So we will have names and contact and an email address so that we can contact them. That's one side. That's from that group. We've got already all the physios. We're working on the other groups. Then the mapping carries on in a survey that it's a PhD physiotherapist from Newcastle University, that is Claire McCroft, that is working together with Hilary Cruikshank, which is a allied health professional from BAPM here. And both of them have designed this survey that was kind of agreed with Anusha and with all of us, to go out into all of these people. The survey should come back with what is happening where. So that's the mapping of the services. So do we have OTs? Where? So thinking of Caroline and how it didn't work with an OT for her, this is going to be very useful. And that's the whole of the UK. And finally, the last bit of Claire's PhD in Newcastle is similar to what Phil has just presented. She's designed a series of interviews for instead of the families, she's doing this for the professionals. So she's finished. We know now that out of 118 neonatal units that are around in the 3 countries, we've got 140 responses, and we've got, as I said, the very beginning, we have all the physios and the emails for all of them in the whole of the UK. So we're moving on to the other, so step by step, but we're getting there. Thank you, Fran, for the question.
Can I just add to that? Just adding to that, Fran. The mapping is really good, and it actually signposts and streamlines the referrals, but it doesn't always totally address the actual funding for each of these services. That's something that we still need to work on at the moment.
I've got a question here. I think I'll give this one to you, please, Phil. This is from Angela Marsh in Sheffield. Given that there is an increased risk for poor outcomes for babies of mothers from a low income or disadvantaged background, how do we take the pressure off parents from having to navigate the system themselves? It's a good question.
It's a big question, yeah. Well, there are examples, I think, of key worker type of scenarios, but I think they are, I don't know how widespread they are. I obviously, in terms of mapping and scoping, nationally, I don't know how common they are, but I do think that some families really need that support in terms of navigating services and what's available in the area, and really, supporting that advocacy, supporting that voice. So yes, I think in terms of the capacity of some families, that is what is required. I'll keep it simple in interest of time.
Thank you. Got a question from Anthony Kaiser. Anthony, would you like to unmute yourself and ask the panel?
Actually, it wasn't a question. It was a further comment on what Angela Arasu said in response to the question about mapping. I think the implication of the question was finding whether there is adequate provision of service in each area, and it would be useful to know what each area is providing. But until we know what we think, what we would recommend as being the optimum service, we don't know what the shortfall is. And that's something which BANFU wants to go on to do and to set the standards in the future. Thank you.
I might be able to answer part of that question, Anthony, if that's okay, Fran. There is currently a need for project managers throughout the whole country, perhaps working in every ODN. And I know we're lucky in London at the moment is that we had funding for that. And we're hoping that from BANFU, when they link up to us, is that these project managers can kind of almost map and see the gap analysis in each area and see where there is a need in each of these services. And I don't mean just the level 3 units, it's right across, healthcare systems, including with the integrated care boards as well. So we're hoping that with this, we might be able to address some of those gaps. But we're actually at the very initial stages at the moment. We're not there yet.
Thank you, Anusha. I don't have any more questions from the panel at the for the panel, but I can see Angela wants to make a comment.
Just one question that I'm very interested in the presentation from Josephine and from Phil. But mostly I'm interested in the terminology, which is so key. So one thing is co-production. The other thing is parental engagement. And we keep talking about parental engagement, and we keep saying that we need to engage the parents in the baby's care and that family integrated care and all of that. But co-production and co-management is such a different thing, isn't it? And so how can we really achieve that? How can we empower the parents to be at the same level as the professionals that are serving them? Question for any of the two of you.
Josephine, you take it first.
Okay, I'll go first. Thank you, Phil. And thank you for the question. So the way we can empower parents, I think, is to first give them information. Because when you have information, then you're well informed and you know what you can demand for. So from the learning of our study, I think this can happen through the whole journey, right from maybe pregnancy when they come for antenatal care, they get the information they need, they get resources where they can turn to. So once you empower them, then they are quite enlightened. They might not have the same expertise as health workers do have, but at least they will have some level of information to be able to ask for more. And then also strengthen the support systems within the family. So as we heard from some of the fathers, that they were there to also support their partners. So I think also strengthening the support systems for mothers is quite important in their families, in the health setting, and probably making it more general within society. I think those are ways that we can empower parents. Thank you.
Yeah, well said, Josephine. I obviously totally agree. And I think it does come back to this idea of when we're talking about this parents engaging, we're always talking about engaging in our world, our professional world, our language, so if only they could understand our world better. And it's such a strange one, isn't it, actually, because there's such a power imbalance. And for some families, they'll be very confident maybe in that world, but for many, they won't be. So I think in very simple terms, as I said, the just a practical thing that I think is really useful is this idea of shared observations. That's by the incubator. Just what do you see? What are you observing? Take away all the medical, and then just look through all of that and see your baby. It's this idea of connection, relationship, how important that is as a starting point, and leveling, and then working with that and adding and it's a collaboration of expertise. But parents, I think, spoke in our study that they don't feel expert in the beginning. We talk about parent experts, but they don't feel experts. So how do we really support them to understand and to see their baby, first of all, relationship, but they do understand their circumstances and what they're feeling. So that's what they're expert in, I suppose, at the beginning, and it's really listening to that. So there's a lot. And as you said, Josephine, information and support, social support, collective confidence and efficacy that can be brought about from good social support is really important. And
I can thank you all again. And I also want to thank Pip, who unfortunately can't be with us, but I know is online. But she put in a lot of work into organizing this webinar as well, and to the rest of my executive, the executive team as well. But thank you very much. I think it's been a really insightful webinar, hearing parents' voices. But we have to draw on all of what we've heard today to try and improve neurodevelopmental outcomes for all our babies and experiences for our parents as well. So thank you very much for participating and joining in.